New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring the relationship between non-local consciousness and religion. With me is Stephan Schwartz, who is the author of The Secret Vaults of Time, Opening to the Infinite, The Alexandria Project, and The 8 Laws of Change, How to Be an Agent for Personal and Social Transformation. He's also written 3 novels. Once again, this is an internet interview, and now I'll switch over to the internet channel. Welcome, Stephan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure to be with you again.
Yeah, and this is a fascinating topic because you have developed I have to call it a unique and a fresh perspective on how science, and in particular, I guess I would say parapsychology, can provide new insights into the nature of religion and to the nature of all religions.
Well, the only difference I would make in that, Jeff, is that it extends far beyond parapsychology. I mean, the neuroscience community is also looking at this and making significant contributions. But yes, I would say consciousness research is making a reappraisal of religion. I may be one of the people who's formulating that, but I certainly don't feel that I'm the only person doing this. We are beginning to consider religion not from the point of view of dogma and faith, but from the point of view of an empirical science developed in human cultures all over the world over millennia.
Well, that's basically, I think, the project that William James outlined in his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, over 100 years ago. And I think you're taking it to a new level. One of the things that I think you are, at least in my mind, are uniquely known for is you like to use that term, and you have popularized it quite a bit, non-local consciousness. And maybe a good starting point would be to try and define it a little better.
It is a worldview. I am, as we have discussed in other interviews, I am a Planckian. In 1931, the Observer newspaper, one of the leading papers in Great Britain, interviewed Max Planck, the father of quantum mechanics, and was very surprised at what he answered when they asked him, you know, you're one of the most famous scientists, you and Einstein are the most famous scientists in the world. You are the father of quantum mechanics. What have you learned? And I think what they thought they were going to get was some exposition on atoms and molecules, and instead what he said was, well, what I've learned is that consciousness is the fundamental and causal component, and that space-time, everything we think of as reality, arises from consciousness, not consciousness from space-time. Consciousness is the fundamental and causal, and you cannot get behind it. And I think that's correct. I think, I'm an experimentalist. I'm not a theoretician in the sense of I cook up ideas or things. Everything I know I get to from experiments. And if you look at the experiments, you see that the materialist perspective, which is that consciousness arises from some kind of neurophysiological, biological, chemical, electrical, whatever, different models, process, and that is essentially a component of space-time. And instead, what Planck is saying, which I think is correct, is that consciousness is the beginning. That is what starts everything, and that the component that I guess I've added, and others, is that what we call space-time is really the manipulation of information by intention-focused consciousness. That's what I think the experimental evidence is telling us, and I began to look at it, at that model, and from that model I began to look at religion and spiritual practices. And you're quite correct. William James had taken an earlier look at this, although he didn't have the experimental data. That's the main thing. He was hypothesizing a worldview, but at that point, late 19th, early 20th century, they just didn't have the data. Now we have, from neuroscience and parapsychology, from medicine, really, in large part, although we normally think of consciousness in physics terms, much of the real contribution to the field has come from medicine, the near-death research, reincarnation research, healing research, for instance.
When you use the word consciousness, we're referring to two different things. One is individual consciousness, like focused attention is something that an individual does with their consciousness. But when you talk about non-local consciousness, it seems to transcend the individual completely.
I think that is correct, because one of the things that we see from, again, the experimental data is that all consciousness is interdependent and interconnected. I mean, we know, for instance, from the healing research that it's possible for the intentioned consciousness of an individual to affect the well-being of another organism, whether it's a bacteria or a fungi or an animal or a bird or a fish or a human being. It doesn't make any difference. This would be called in parapsychology probably non-local perturbation. That is, their consciousness is having a physical effect in materiality. But in religion, we think of this as being, instead of thinking of this unity of consciousness, we tend to associate it with gods or God. But I think God is just a statement of unity.
Another word that religions use is spirit.
And now to refine it a little better, non-local consciousness, by that I mean non-physiologically based consciousness. This is the aspect of the self, what in religion is known as the soul, this eternal aspect of the self that goes on, that existed prior to your incarnation and will exist after your corporeal death. It is in religion known as the soul, and then the spirit is this individual connection that you're making. But if you strip away all of the dogma and the faith and all of that, and you just look at what is going on from an experimental point of view, what you see is that all religions, regardless of their faith, all begin with the non-local consciousness experience of a single individual. I mean, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, he goes to the hermitage of Aridatta Kalama, and he learns how to meditate. And as a result of that, he has these experiences which lead him to found what we call Buddhism today. Jesus at the beginning of the Common Era, he's 30 years old, he experiences the opening of consciousness when he's baptized. Muhammad in 610, and he's 40 years old, goes to a cave called the Hira, where he goes to meditate, and the Archangel Gabriel appears to him, he says. So in all cases, the commonality is that these are the founding people learn how to attain and sustain intention-focused awareness. And they do this through what we call meditation, which is really a technique. There are many different ways of doing it, but all of them are essentially about focusing your consciousness not on the sort of cognitive chatter that's going on in your head most of the time, but instead to hold one-pointedness, they sometimes call it, and you are able to attain and sustain intention-focused awareness. And we see the same thing in science. Remote viewers, for instance, meditators who remote view always do better than non-meditators. And there's lots and lots of research on this and what meditation is doing. And the neuroscience community has a great deal to say about this, and it's the aspects of the brain. But basically, I mean, in terms of the context we're talking about today, this is all about this ability to attain and sustain intention-focused awareness. And you have an experience of consciousness which is not based on sensorial stimulation, taste, touch, smell. It's not based on sort of what you're looking at or that sort of thing. It's a connection with a sense of oneness, of unity, of the Godhead, of the Omega. I mean, lots and lots of different words, but they're all saying that basically the same thing. So the religions begin because a single individual has this experience. And if they are charismatic enough and they talk about their experience, others listen to them and are moved by what they hear. Now, not everybody that has that single-pointedness experience who talks about it founds a religion. You have to have a certain charisma, and you have to be talking in a way that resonates with the group consciousness of the culture to which you're speaking. Otherwise, you're just a crank. I mean, the difference between a prophet and a crank is that people listen to the prophet and they just dismiss the crank. So that tells us something else, and that is that religions begin because of the experience of a single individual, but they take form because they resonate with the culture or group of which that person is a part, a member. And people listen to what they say, and they try to develop similar techniques in their own lives to make the connection, and people take down what is said, and that's the beginning of scripture and dogma. But if you're looking at it from an experimentalist point of view, what you're really looking at is a kind of empirical science emerging. And if you look at religions across all culture, geography, time, what you see is that this same empirical science develops again and again and again. The dogmas and the teachings that they have that come out of them, that is entirely man-made. That's a person's interpretation of his experience that he articulates or she articulates, and that other people hear and then they interpret. And this goes on for sometimes centuries. I mean, you look at the Bible, and most biblical historians will tell you that the Bible was written over centuries. It wasn't written all down at one time. These are stories and beliefs and convictions that people record, and they become the dogma and the faith. And the difference between religion and science is that in religion, facts are not dispositive. What matters is conviction, dogma, faith. In science, we look at these things from the point of view of objectively verifiable information. And so faith and dogma don't make any difference. What matters are facts. And so from the point of view of science, again, science and religion, is that religion doesn't evolve except very, very slowly. The beliefs that people have today are very much like the beliefs people had centuries ago. Indeed, there's a large percentage of the American population who believe the world was created 6,000 years ago. And they do that because Bishop Ussher, a Protestant theologian who was trying to show the Jesuits of Ireland that he was just as smart as they were, came up with this, by measuring the begats, came up with this idea of when the world was created. Well, people still believe that. Because in religion, facts are not dispositive. They don't have the same weight that they do in science. In science, what we care about is facts, and we don't really care very much about faith and dogma, although paradigm is essentially a kind of dogma. Mm-hmm. And so science is very much constrained by dogma, as you can see by the fact that consciousness is not a fundamental in science. It's only now becoming one, and that dates back to the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, where the Roman Catholic hierarchy, the curia, the top of the church, had a series of 25 meetings over those years, and out of it they came up with this a pronouncement, a dictum, that said consciousness, spirit, belongs to the church, and you guys in science, you can have materiality, you can have space-time. And in order to enforce that separation, if we catch you doing this and we can get at you, why, we're going to torture you and kill you and burn you alive. That was the Inquisition. And they did it. And so what happened was scientists, I think, went from the humiliation of being told what they could or couldn't study to it became a meme, and then it became a paradigm. I mean, there's nothing inherently scientific about materialism, although every materialist will tell you that there is. But when you press and you climb really into the issue and get into the tall weeds, what you discover is materialism is a cultural affectation.
You seem to be saying is that science is a lot more like religion than most people want to acknowledge, in the sense that it has dogmas, and religion is more like science than most people would acknowledge, in the sense that they do pay attention to some empirical evidence, and over the centuries, if those empirical observations continue, the religion survives.
Yes, exactly. That is precisely what I'm saying. If you think about it, rituals are essentially protocols. And protocols are essentially rituals. There are ways of attaining and sustaining intention-focused awareness. And whether you're trying to have an experience of God, or whether you're trying to do a remote viewing of a teacup hidden in a closet halfway around the world, I mean, basically, in one case you use a ritual, and in the other you use a protocol. And just to really bring that home, think about the nature of religious gatherings. If you look at religious gatherings, you see the same elements over and over, regardless of what the religion is. First of all, there is the place. Whether it's a temple or a synagogue or an Etruscan oak grove, doesn't make any difference. It's the place where you gather. Now, in science, we know that intention-focused awareness of a location creates what amounts to sacred space. In remote viewing, for instance, we know that it is easier to see Chartres Cathedral than it is a warehouse of the same size. Now, why is that true? And the answer is because from the moment it was conceived, Chartres Cathedral has been the focus of emotionally charged intentioned awareness. Nobody pays any attention to warehouses, so it's not the physical size, it's not the construction material, because Etruscan oak groves were just as sacred as synagogues or temples or churches. It's just the cultural context in which they were seen. So acts of intention-focused awareness create sacred space. Only it's not sacred. That's the religious context. In science, we would say acts of intention-focused awareness create high numinosity of a target. So that, as I say, it's easier to remote view Chartres Cathedral than a warehouse. And in both instances, the shift is not in the physical structure of the thing, but in the non-local information architecture of it.
Can you define that term, numinosity?
The term was originally coined in the 19th century by a German theologian, but the context in which I have developed it comes from Jung. Jung said noumena, by which I think he means information. Noumena are psychic entia, he says. They exist outside of space and time. Well, I would say this is non-local information, because I think what we are looking at, whether it's religion or science, is non-local informational architectures that are created by intention-focused awareness, which is essentially what Plato was saying several thousand years ago when he talks about the people in the cave and the idea also of these ideal forms that he talks about, that what he's really saying is that consciousness creates these information architectures. Jung says noumena, and from that numinosity. So numinosity is an informational enriching. Numinosity is increased. Let me frame it correctly. Numinosity is increased by individual acts of intentioned, focused awareness. That's why people have totems of various kinds. That's why mandalas make a difference. That's why tankas make a difference, because people have been looking at those images for years and years, centuries, millennia, focusing on them in a common way while they are in a state of intention-focused awareness. And so you can roll up a tanka and take it with you. You can't roll up a church and take it with you. So you can create a spiritual space by using objects which have been in their specific form have been the target of intention-focused awareness for long periods of time by many people. Mm-hmm. And as I say, in science, when we look at this, what we see is that, for instance, in the experiments on presentiment, they notice that when people are staring at a blank monitor screen and there's nothing, just a few seconds before the image appears, it's randomly controlled by some kind of random number generator, that their eyes dilate in anticipation of the stimulus that has not yet occurred, and that if this stimulus evokes a strong emotional response, for instance, it's highly sexual or it's very violent, that this anticipated stimulation, this presentiment of stimulation, causes more dilation. Why is that? Because where there is emotion focused with intention-focused awareness, there is a stronger response. And so in religion, you begin with, you create the space where you gather.
Now, the presentiment studies that you cited, though the response is in the body, it's not a conscious response.
That's right. Well, it's not a conscious response. It may be an emotional response.
Yeah.
but it's not a cognitively response. And more than that, I'll come to this in a second. So you have the place where you gather. You gather and you make a statement of common intention. The Nicene Creed, if you're a Christian, for instance. There's a part that's man-made. That's the statements of dogma, but all of that is designed to create collective intention. And in the neuroscience community, you look at, for instance, Andrew Newberg and neurotheology. What they find when they hook people up to EEGs is that all the brain waves become synced. And similarly, in the religious service, there is a period that produces where a greater intention focus, where you drum, you chant, you dance, you sing, whatever. I mean, you do some coordinated activity which focuses everyone's intention. And this can be objectively measured by neuroscience techniques. So you gather in the place. It's highly numinous and it becomes more numinous as it becomes older and older because there are more and more acts of intentioned observation. And when you gather there, you must begin with making a statement of intention. And then there's this period of dancing, singing, drumming, chanting, whatever, so that your brains become entrained. And then there is a period in which some, not all, but some, and you never know when, some of the members of the community can have a non-local consciousness experience, which further validates the truth of the religion from a religious point of view. But that would be speaking in tongues, prophecy, healing, all those kinds of things. So that you have in the service a series of protocols designed, and from science's point of view, to produce non-intention focused awareness, which allows you to open to non-local consciousness, which allows things to occur which from a religious point of view validate the religion, from a scientific point of view can be objectively measured, because in the healing research we know that people holding healing intention, therapeutic intention as we call it in science, can have an effect on any kind of organism you like. We don't think of it in terms of, if you look at, for instance, therapeutic touch, a system of therapeutic intention healing developed by Doris Kuntz and Dolores Krieger, which is practiced by nurses all over the world, has no religious context. It's simply about teaching people how to attain and sustain intention-focused awareness so that they can express therapeutic intention. And we know also that this therapeutic intention can be for both good or ill, because that's where curses and possessions and all of that, the negative aspect of it, because we know from experiments that have been done that therapeutic intention can cause, for instance, bacterial colonies either to grow better or to not grow and indeed die off. You can see this in all kinds of experiments. So it's devoid of, in religion it has moral values that go along with it. But in fact, the idea that the consciousness of one individual can have an effect on the well-being of another organism, for good or ill, is well established in science.
Not only do religions use this, but occasionally these methods and techniques get incorporated into political processes as well.
Absolutely. If you look at what Donald Trump is doing, for instance, what he is doing is invoking the fear and emotional charge of about a third of the country who are fearful about the fact that the United States is about to become a a majority minority country, and that for Caucasians, their get out of jail card, as it were, is going to be rescinded. Their status is going to change. And for some people, there's a percentage of the population who have overactive right amygdalas, which is keyed to fight or flight, that they're terrified because the world that they grew up in and knew, where women knew their place and black people knew their place, and all of that is changing with gender equality, racial equality, and it freaks them out. And Trump is motivating that in these rallies that he holds. They're just like church services. It's like an evangelical church service. He says his thing and they chant it back to him, build the wall, or whatever. It's exactly the same process. Mm-hmm. But Trump is an example of a man who has sort of empirically figured out that if I do certain things, I can rouse people. That's what Hitler did. He would hold these big gatherings and torchlight and people in uniform, and he would get up and make these speeches evoking this strong emotional response, and then he would get everybody to chant along with him. It's the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. Because what all of this is about, whether it's religion, whether it's science, or whether it's politics, is about the fact that all consciousness is interlinked and interdependent, and that if you know how to manipulate it, you can create focused, intentioned awareness.
Yeah. I know that in some ancient cultures, kings were assumed to have the power of healing. Sick people would come to a king. If he touched them, they might be healed.
That's right. Because the collective belief of shared conviction that the king had the power of royal touch, when that happened, if you believed and you were strong enough, then it happened. Because if you think about we look at science and we think about what is really going on in therapeutic intention. Is something being sent? No. The brain has enough power to light a single little tiny Christmas LED bulb. That's it. So you can't possibly be sending anything.
Yeah.
And in any case, how would you target it? You got 7.5 billion people on the planet. What is the targeting mechanism? That's not what's going on. What's happening is you have linkage because all consciousness is interdependent and interconnected. And when someone holds you in healing intention, they are basically stimulating you to activate your immune system. Mm-hmm. I did a series of experiments in which I had people do healing while they had little vials of water on their hands, and I found that there was a very specific change in the molecular structure of the water that had to do with the HO bonding relationship. And when I looked in the oncology literature, I found about 129 papers, not about, 129 papers, that showed that when that exact same change occurred in the water in the cells of the body, that the body's immune response was turned on in a heightened way, particularly the production of T8 cells.
Oh.
So what you got is linkage in healing. Linkage which stimulates you to activate your own healing capacity. And depending on how strongly you feel about that and how receptive you are to it, that has to do with how successful it is.
Mm-hmm. Now, you extrapolated from that research to suggest that the use of holy water in various religious rituals might be based on the capacity, the newly discovered capacity of water to be affected by focused conscious intention.
Yes, that I was just about going to say. You take that in science. Okay, in science we have not a single experiment, my water experiment, but a number of other. Dean Radin, for instance, did an experiment using Buddhist monks and chocolate, and also another one involving tea, just tea, mm-hmm. where so it produces not only objectively measurable effects that we know about, the change in the molecular structure of the water, but also it changes the subjective aesthetic experience of the thing. I did another experiment where I had people do wine tastings. I would take a bottle of wine and split it into two. So it's a 750 milliliter bottle of wine. I split it into two carafes of 375 milliliters. And I would have meditators focus on one of them and not on the other one. So that it's exactly the same wine, has exactly the same history. The difference being that one of them is the focus of therapeutic intention. I had a group of meditators meditate for 20 minutes on that wine, and then I gave the wine to a party host and asked them to do a wine tasting for me. And I told them, I'm going to make a big wine buy, and it's a lot of money. And so would you do me the favor of having a taste test? I won't be there because I don't want to cue anybody. I don't want to tell them. And there's no label on the wine so that they have any sort of cognitive awareness. I just want their taste results. And could you have them taste the two wines and tell me which one is better? And I did 12 of these sessions using 7 tasters per party. In 11 of the 12 sessions, they chose the wine that was the target of therapeutic intention. So is that also changing the water in the wine? I don't know. That experiment hasn't been done. But what we can say, just as with Dean's chocolate and his tea experiments, that the aesthetic appreciation of the wine that was the target of the meditation was better than the wine that was the control.
And of course, these tasters are blind. They have no idea.
No, they have no idea. What they think is that they're being offered two different wines. I would go to a wine store up on Wisconsin Avenue. This was in Washington and D.C. and in Virginia. I'd go to a wine store and buy a good quality Cabernet, like a $20 bottle of wine. And then I would take it home and pour it into two carafes, which I would then seal. And then I would randomly assign numbers. One was the A, one was the B. And then I would do a second randomization to which was going to be the control and which was going to be the treated. And then I would take those two carafes in separate styrofoam containers so that they had exactly the same history to my friend who was going to give the party. And tell him, I'm going to make this big wine buy, as I said, and I'm going to spend a lot of money and I don't want to waste it. So would you do this tasting for me? And that'll tell me which wine I should buy. All of that's just front story. Had nothing to do with. So yes, they're not only completely blind to the fact that the wines were the target of meditation, either of them, they're completely blind to everything. What they think they're doing is tasting two different wines, and I'm asking them to tell me which one is the better wine.
What you're saying is this research could form the empirical basis behind the notion of blessing your food before you eat it.
Absolutely. Just to stay with religion, if you think about it, what happens with holy water? The priest focuses intentioned awareness on the water, and that changes the water. It's a fundamental belief of many religions. Or in the wine, if you're a Christian, the transubstantiation of the wine, that it is transformed by the blessing that the priest gives it, that there's this miracle that happens. It's the same thing. So whether it was my wine tasting in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., or whether it was the wine tasting not in the context of taste, but in the context of holiness, quote unquote, whether it was sacred wine, it's the same process. Yeah. One is a ritual, the other is a protocol.
In Judaism, there is a term called kavanah, which is the spirit with which you perform the ritual or the prayer. It's not enough to just go through the motions.
Yes, exactly. You have to, what is your intention? You have to hold, and if you are a holy person, that is a person who is known to be able to attain and sustain intention-focused awareness, as a priest is supposed to be, or if you, let's see, in Judaism on Friday nights, I think, they have a blessing of the wine. What you're looking at is a ritual that is actually a protocol which we can, in science, objectively measure. That's the important part.
Right.
That these things which are presented and accepted as faith in religion actually are empirical sciences which can be measured objectively.
Well, I know when I studied anthropology as an undergraduate, they had a lecture on what was called folkways, which could be any folk tradition that has survived over time. And the point was that they may seem totally irrational to you, but if they have survived over time, there must be some pragmatic value there.
Yes, exactly. I actually make a difference between enduring religions and cults. Enduring religions are practices, again, strip away the dogma and all the rest of it, the scripture part, and just deal with it as an empirical science. And if people have been doing things, that's what got me interested in this. Why in the world have people associated both wine and water for thousands of years? If you go back to the fundamental creation legends, for instance, you find that almost all faiths going back thousands of years all begin with water. They come out of water. Holy rivers, holy oceans, holy just the waters. Why associate? Why not beer or tomato juice or whatever? And the answer is because it was observed empirically that if there was intention-focused awareness directed at water, that something happened. And the reason, the difference, I think, between water and wine is that wine has always been recognized to have psychoactive properties. And so wine, unlike water, breaks down into sort of two uses. There's the recreational use, cuisines, bars, cafes, that thing. And then there is the sacred part. And the reason that didn't happen with water is that it was also recognized millennia ago that what science calls raw water was dangerous. And that you just couldn't drink it. You couldn't just pull it up, you took it, there was a risk that was involved. Whereas with wine, that wasn't present. But the key to me was, why are wine and water associated with both spiritual practices and religion, with spiritual and in a religious context across millennia of time, geography, and culture? And the answer, I think, is that because it was empirically observed that when you focused intention awareness on these substances, that there was a change that happened. They didn't know what the change was, so they made it was sacred, or it was God making the change, or whatever. But that, in fact, in science, we can see these are changes which can be objectively measured. So yes, science and religion, there's only one mountain in town, and it's an illusion, so how you get up it is largely a matter of personal taste and style.
You're using mountain here as a metaphor for all religions.
Awakening to non-local consciousness, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so if you look at it from that point of view, then you understand that religion is a practice premised on and built on the idea of opening to non-local consciousness, the Godhead, the Omega, the Goddess, whatever your particular cultural belief is. But it's this opening process. And in science, we see this in the same way in remote viewing, therapeutic intention, near-death experiences, presentiment experiences, experiments, all of those various kinds of protocols, which are essentially the rituals of science.
In some ways, I regard your thinking here as a breakthrough. It's a new, fresh look at religion, and it suggests that if the larger scientific academic community digs a little bit and takes this research seriously, we're going to see many new forms of religion evolve as a result.
Well, I don't know if we're going to see many new forms. I think what we are going to see, and what is critical to see, is that all consciousness is interconnected and interlinked, and that the scientific techniques developed in both parapsychology, neuroscience, medicine, and religion, which are all talking about basically the same thing, that this is going to be a new paradigm that will give us the insights that will allow us to deal with the catastrophic changes which are coming as a result of climate change. You know, when most people talk about what are we going to do about climate change, assuming they even believe it exists, most of the discussions are about technology. I'm just writing a paper on this subject based on research I've been doing over the last several years. Most people, the discussions are about technologies, AI, new kinds of energy forms, blah, 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 whatever.
I think one of the reasons for that is because it seems as if a political solution is hopeless. There seems to be no political will. People are banking on technology to solve this problem out of desperation.
Yes, I think that's probably true. But what I'm trying to say is that that's not the way to solve the problem. The way to solve the problem is to change the cultural worldview, to change the paradigm, if you will, to recognize that we are, first of all, that consciousness is fundamental and that we are all interconnected and interdependent, that we do not have dominion over the earth. We are part of a big matrix of consciousness, and that we're going to select which technologies to emphasize and how to emphasize them, not on the basis of which one is going to be the most profitable, but instead on which one will create the greatest well-being. I have developed, we haven't done a conversation on this, but I have developed what I call the theorem of well-being. And I think that the only way that human civilization is going to survive is by adopting the theorem of well-being. That is, that the highest social priority must be to foster well-being from the individual, the family, the community, the state, the nation, the planet itself. That it is in finding resonance with a worldview founded on well-being. Not that it's against profit. You can make all the profits you want. That's not the point. But that you simply cannot have the kind of neoliberal profit above all worldview that now dominates how most of human societies operate. It's not going to save us. It's not about technology. It's about changing the way we look at the world, which means abandoning the Abrahamic idea that we have dominion over the earth. We don't.
You're right. That's why I do these videos, to try and put these ideas out into the culture as widely as possible, because I think that a change of consciousness is demanded of us at this point in time.
I agree with you. And that's why I agree to do these interviews. I think this is very important. I have an enormous sense of urgency. Every day I wake up, I feel like a man on the Titanic listening to the alarms going off and thinking, what can we do to save ourselves? And the answer is to get people to begin to think from the perspective of well-being. that the function of society ought to be to create well-being. Also, I might add that I have been studying this now, this particular aspect I've been studying for almost 18 years. I wrote 8 Laws of Change as a part of that. But what you discover is that nonviolent social transformation is more successful than violent transformation. Yeah. And it lasts longer.
Yeah, we've done a whole program just on that.
Yes, that well-being is when you create social policies and create a culture of which fostering well-being is the first priority, you find out that it is more efficient, more effective, more productive, easier to implement, nicer to live under, and much, much cheaper.
Stephan Schwartz, this has been, as always, a very enlightening conversation. I think you're really pioneering some new ideas with regard to scientific perspectives on religion, and I think those ideas are about to make a splash.
Your mouth to God's ears. Okay, well, thank you, Jeff. It's always a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Stephan.
Three in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy.